A millionaire CEO hadn't been physically close to any woman in 20 years, but everything changed when his new assistant entered his life. Before we jump into the tale, feel free to leave a comment about where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The atmosphere at Cole Industries was unusually heavy that morning. Normally bustling corridors were filled with whispered conversations and sidelong glances. "Did you hear? Marcus Cole hired a new assistant," one staff member murmured. "Does she know about his no-touch rule?" Another replied. "I doubt it. This is going to be a disaster." That rule was clear and unyielding. Marcus had never made any physical contact with a woman, not even a handshake or a light brush. Over the years, the female employees had grown accustomed to his peculiar behavior. Some shrugged it off as typical billionaire quirkiness, while others speculated about some deep-seated past trauma. But no one dared get too close until Olivia Davis arrived. It was Olivia's first day, and she couldn't understand why everything felt so strange. The looks she received were a mixture of pity and curiosity, as if she were walking straight into a trap. While she was still settling in, Jenna, the executive secretary, hurriedly called out, "Marcus needs a tie. Grab one and take it to him now." Olivia blinked and replied, "A tie? I thought it was just a simple errand." Still, she didn't question it further. She walked over to the executive dressing room and opened the tie cabinet, only to be met with a dilemma. There were around 50 ties neatly arranged. Which color would a man like Marcus, so famously untouchable, prefer? She wondered aloud. After a moment of indecision, she selected a navy blue tie, then a black one, then a gray, until panic set in and she ended up grabbing them all at once. Determined, she marched toward Marcus's office with her arms full of ties. All she needed to do was hand him one and leave. Knocking on the door, she said, "Come in." Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside to find Marcus Cole standing by his desk, meticulously adjusting his shirt cuffs, as if he'd just resolved a major crisis before breakfast. He looked up and frowned at the sight of the jumble of ties. "What's with all these?" he asked. Olivia hesitated. "I wasn't sure which one you preferred, so I brought them all." Marcus fixed her with a long, weary sigh. "Just give me one." With that, Olivia dropped the ties onto his desk and, in a rush, randomly picked one out to offer him. He raised an eyebrow at the patterned tie, realizing in an instant that she had mistakenly grabbed one printed with tiny rubber ducks. She quickly retracted it. "Not that one here," she said, selecting a plain navy blue tie. Marcus nodded briefly, and Olivia smiled, relieved that her errand was finally over. Just as she turned to leave, she noticed something odd. Marcus was tying his tie completely wrong. He was twisting and knotting it as if he were trying to strangle an invisible foe. Olivia couldn't help but think this was a crime against proper office style. Without overthinking it, she stepped closer and said, "Wait, you're doing it wrong. Let me help." In that moment, when her fingertips brushed his neck, everything seemed to change. Marcus stiffened as if hit by an electric shock. Olivia stared, startled. "Oh my gosh, what just happened?" Marcus's eyes were wide as he muttered, "You touched me." I was just fixing your tie," Olivia replied, a bit confused by his reaction. "Never do that again," he said firmly. "Okay, I'm sorry," she replied, not quite understanding why a simple touch had triggered such an extreme response. Inside, Marcus ran his hand over his neck, trying to erase that unexpected sensation. His breathing grew uneven as he stared at her, visibly tormented. "You don't understand," he murmured. "Then help me understand," Olivia retorted, crossing her arms. "I can't be touched," he insisted. "What do you mean you can't be touched? Do you turn into something or explode?" She joked, but he remained serious and desperate. Finally, after a long silence, he commanded, "Just don't do it again." Olivia hesitated, feeling a mix of guilt and confusion. She never imagined that a simple act of kindness could lead to such a reaction. As she glanced at his troubled face, she sensed that beneath the anger and fear was something more vulnerable. "All right, I won't," she promised softly. Marcus's shoulders relaxed ever so slightly, yet his expression still carried an unmistakable tension. "You could go now," he said, Rolling her eyes in disbelief, Olivia muttered, "Fine, boss, no more touching," and left the room completely unaware of the impact she had made. After the door clicked shut behind her, Marcus lingered, his hand still hovering over the spot where her touch had lingered. His heart pounded with an intensity he hadn't experienced in decades. Something about her contact felt both forbidden and electrifying, and it had shaken his carefully constructed world. The entire office seemed to buzz with curious stares as Olivia walked away, her cheeks slightly flushed, utterly clueless about what had just unfolded. Back at her desk, Olivia tried to shake off the odd feeling while massaging her temples. Her first day was already spiraling into chaos. Just then, Ethan Brooks, the head of finance, ambled over with his ever-present cup of coffee. "So, you survived that encounter, huh?" he teased. Olivia frowned. "Survived? What do you mean?" Leaning casually against her desk, Ethan said, "Nobody ever touches Marcus, you know." Olivia's eyes widened in surprise. "Wait, he really doesn't want any physical contact?" Ethan explained, "Exactly. He has this strict rule. No woman is allowed to touch him." Olivia couldn't help but chuckle. "Well, he should have warned me before having a full-blown meltdown." Ethan grinned and added, "Technically, you did touch him, but you were just fixing his tie. He's just not used to it." The remark left Olivia both amused and mystified as she walked away, wondering how one accidental touch could break 2 decades of habit. Meanwhile, inside Marcus's office, he was visibly shaken. He couldn't concentrate on his work. Charts, spreadsheets, and market projections all blurred together in his mind. All because of that one touch. He ran his fingers along the collar of his perfectly tied shirt, trying to recapture the sense of normalcy he'd built over 20 years. The last time someone had dared to touch him in such a way was decades ago, and it had ended disastrously. Ever since, he'd sworn off all physical contact with women. But somehow, Olivia was different. As he caught his own reflection in the glass wall overlooking the city, he realized that for the first time in a long while, he didn't understand himself. Was it a fluke? An exception? He decided he had to test his limits. A couple of hours later, while Olivia was busy reviewing a report, the secretary called her into Marcus's office. "Marcus wants you in his office. And bring the investor meeting report. He wants it handed to him directly," came the instruction. Olivia, still rattled by the earlier incident, grabbed the papers and headed to his office. Inside, Marcus stood behind his desk with that same intense, unreadable expression. "Here's the report, Mr. Cole," she said as she approached. Marcus reached out his hand, and for a split second, Olivia hesitated. After all, only a few hours earlier, his reaction had been extreme because she touched him. Still, she extended the folder. At that moment, when his fingers grazed hers again, his body tensed imperceptibly. It was a brief, electric moment that sent a jolt through him. His heart skipped a beat. In his nervousness, he grabbed the papers too quickly, and one sheet slipped to the floor. "Damn," he muttered. Instantly, Olivia bent down to retrieve it. As she stood up, Marcus also leaned down, and their foreheads brushed ever so slightly, creating an awkward silence. Their eyes were nearly touching, and Olivia stifled a laugh, remarking, "If this were a reflex test, you'd have passed." Marcus cleared his throat, gathered the scattered pages, and insisted, "That wasn't a test." Olivia, arms crossed, teased, "Bumping heads is hardly an effective work strategy." Without further comment, he turned back to his desk, pretending nothing unusual had happened. Later, as Marcus stood by Olivia's desk, he asked in a low, measured tone, "Are you all right? You seem off today." His expression was impassive as he pulled the report from her hands with a bit more force than necessary. Olivia, unconvinced, arched an eyebrow. "I'm perfectly fine," she insisted, though her tone betrayed a hint of sarcasm. Still, Marcus remained silent, his mind clearly still reeling from their earlier encounter. After a moment, he strode back into his office, determined to ignore the growing pull he felt toward her. Yet every time he closed his eyes, the memory of her touch resurfaced, impossible to ignore. As the day dragged on, Marcus grew increasingly agitated. He began deliberately avoiding Olivia, skipping past her department in the hallways, dodging eye contact, and even altering his route to avoid any accidental encounters. But nothing worked. Wherever he turned, there she was. Whether it was the elevator, the break room, or even the company cafe, Olivia's presence was constant. No matter how much he tried to distance himself, the memory of her touch haunted him, stirring feelings he had long suppressed. One day, after another exhausting afternoon, Marcus called Olivia into his office. When she entered, she seemed completely at ease, almost nonchalant, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. "Go ahead," he said, his voice strained. "From now on, I want all interactions to be strictly professional. No extra conversations, no jokes." Olivia raised an eyebrow and replied, "Really? Didn't you already make it clear?" Marcus's face hardened. "And please, stop staring at me all the time." Olivia flashed a playful smile. "It's just a coincidence that every time I look up, your eyes are on me," she teased. He tried to protest, but the words faltered. "If you truly feel nothing, then there's no reason to be uneasy," she continued, stepping closer. Marcus's heart raced, and despite himself, he whispered, "Are you free for dinner tonight?" Olivia paused, then stared at him in disbelief. "What?" He quickly added, "Dinner with me. It's business, of course." She frowned. "I thought you were all about keeping things strictly professional." He hesitated before adding, "I figured you wouldn't say no." After a few long moments, Olivia relented. "All right, if you want to, then I'll join you." And so that evening, at exactly 7 o'clock, Olivia was ready. That night, Olivia looked nothing short of stunning. Gone was her typical casual office look. Instead, she wore a sleek black dress that clung to her curves perfectly, and her hair, usually pulled back into a practical bun, cascaded in soft waves. When Marcus arrived in a sharp black tuxedo, he paused for a moment, clearly taken aback. "Is something wrong?" Olivia asked, noticing his brief hesitation. He quickly masked it with indifference. They stepped into his car and soon reached a luxurious event hall filled with glittering chandeliers, soft classical music, and waiters offering champagne. As they entered, Olivia couldn't help but notice the many admiring glances directed at Marcus. "You're quite the center of attention," she remarked. "Center of attention isn't exactly the word I'd use," he replied. "Oh, come on. You're the mysterious CEO who never lets anyone get too close. I bet half these people are wondering how you managed to bring a date." He sighed. "Watch your words." Olivia grinned. "Where's the fun in that?" Before long, several guests approached Marcus for greetings, and he responded politely, keeping as cool as always. But Olivia's attention was drawn to a striking blonde woman in a red dress approaching them. Her smile was cool and calculated. "Marcus," the woman said with an air of familiarity. He simply nodded. "Isabella," she introduced herself. Olivia felt an immediate tension. Isabella Reed was the ex-lover who had shattered Marcus's heart years ago. "I can't believe you're here with a date," Isabella said, eyeing Olivia with a measured look. Seizing the moment, Olivia slipped her arm through Marcus's and smiled warmly. "Marcus is a gentleman. He'd never let me come alone." Marcus stiffened at the remark. Isabella forced a polite smile. "Really?" she said. "Well, Marcus has always been reserved," Olivia continued. "Maybe he was just waiting for someone who could break his ice." Isabella studied her for a moment before walking away without another word. Marcus let out a heavy sigh. "That was completely unnecessary." Olivia playfully retorted, "I'm not about to let an ex steal my thunder. You do enjoy stirring things up, don't you?" She laughed. "I like to level the playing field." For a few moments, Marcus simply watched her, his thoughts tangled in confusion and an emerging attraction. Hours later, when the event finally wound down, Olivia felt utterly drained. She sank into the back seat of Marcus's car, exhaling a long, weary sigh after a day filled with high tension. Marcus, meanwhile, drove in silence, lost in his conflicted thoughts. As they neared her building, Olivia glanced at him. "Thanks for picking me up," she said. Marcus briefly met her gaze before saying, "Good night." Stepping out of the car, Olivia smiled, and for the first time that evening, Marcus allowed himself a tiny smile in return. In the days that followed, Marcus found it impossible to shake Olivia from his mind. He tried to force himself to ignore her, burying himself in work. Yet every glance in the hallway, every burst of her laughter, reignited that inexplicable feeling. Whether she was alone or chatting with colleagues, he found himself searching for her in every corner of the office. No matter how much he tried to maintain his stern, detached demeanor, her presence continued to disrupt his carefully ordered life. One afternoon, while Marcus was deep in a contract review in a conference room, he heard laughter echo from the hallway. Peeking through the glass, he spotted Olivia chatting with Ethan Brooks. For reasons he couldn't explain, a surge of jealousy welled up inside him as he noticed her light, carefree laughter. Unable to contain it, he stormed over to them. "Olivia, I need to talk to you now," he said sharply. Startled, she turned toward him with a fleeting smile that quickly vanished as she sensed his irritation. "Ethan, I think I'll leave you two to it," he ordered. Ethan raised an eyebrow knowingly and excused himself with a wink. Alone with Olivia, Marcus struggled for words. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Marcus blinked, then exhaled heavily. "Forget it," he muttered, trying to regain control as he turned away. But then, as he was about to leave, he felt a light touch on his wrist. Olivia's hand rested softly there, and for an instant, his heart pounded as if in alarm. "Please be honest, what's going on?" she pressed. For a moment, Marcus couldn't answer, so he pulled his hand away and muttered, "Get back to work." Despite his attempt to dismiss it, Olivia's probing left him feeling increasingly vulnerable. Days turned into weeks, and Marcus tried every trick in the book to avoid Olivia's infectious presence. He started delegating more tasks, altering his routines, and even dodging the elevator if he knew she'd be there. Yet every attempt to escape her only deepened his obsession. No matter where he went, the coffee shop, the break room, or even in long, silent walks through the office halls, Olivia was always there. Each accidental brush of her hand or fleeting glance made it even harder for him to deny what was happening inside him. One day, after another grueling meeting, Olivia finally confronted him as he was leaving the building. "Marcus, what's going on? Why have you been avoiding me?" she demanded, her voice firm yet caring. Marcus fumbled for words. "I don't know what you mean," he stammered. "Then why do you act like I'm a threat?" Olivia stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "Are you scared of me?" she asked softly. He quickly tried to laugh it off. "Don't be ridiculous." But before he could retreat, she pressed on, "If you really feel nothing, then prove it." And in a moment of weakness, he blurted out, "Are you free for dinner tonight?" Olivia froze. "What? Dinner?" she echoed, disbelief in her tone. Marcus cleared his throat. "It's business, of course." Olivia studied him for a moment and then replied with a smirk, "I always thought you were too strict about these things." Realizing he had already lost control, Marcus nodded. "All right then." 2 hours later, they found themselves sitting across from each other in an upscale restaurant. Olivia casually scanned the menu while Marcus sat in quiet contemplation. "Is this really just a business dinner?" Olivia inquired. Marcus hesitated. I wasn't sure how else to say it." Olivia leaned forward. "I saw how you looked at me last night. You're trying to figure out what changed, aren't you?" Marcus fell silent, his eyes betraying emotions he struggled to hide. Throughout dinner, the conversation vacillated between business formalities and hints of personal confessions. When the evening finally ended, Marcus drove Olivia home in silence. At her building, as she stepped out of the car, she said, "Thanks for tonight." Marcus nodded. "Good night, Olivia." Watching her disappear into the night, he sat in the car for a long while, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't shake. Later that night, unable to sleep, Marcus lay in his apartment staring at the ceiling, tormented by the realization that Olivia had changed everything, and he didn't know how to handle it. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the office in his usual style, straight and determined. As he walked through the lobby, the employees straightened up and fell silent. Then, his eyes caught sight of Olivia at her desk, finishing a cup of coffee and laughing at something Ethan had said. That laugh stirred something deep inside him. For a split second, his steps slowed as he paused by her desk. Is a report ready? Olivia asked as she held a folder in her hand. Marcus hesitated, recalling the memory of their earlier touch, but took the folder from her with a bit more force than usual. As he did, Olivia fixed him with a steady look. Are you okay? You seem off today. Marcus forced a smile and mumbled, I'm fine, though his eyes said otherwise. After a moment, he turned and walked away, trying to ignore the undeniable pull that Olivia had on him. Over the next several days, Marcus became a shadow of his former self. He buried himself in work, attended meetings with a detached air, and yet every time he caught a glimpse of Olivia, whether she was laughing with colleagues or simply moving through the office, he felt a surge of longing he couldn't explain. His carefully constructed world of order and control was slowly unraveling, and he was powerless to stop it. One afternoon, after yet another tense meeting, Marcus found himself alone in the corridor when he heard the soft sound of footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Olivia standing there, determination etched on her face. Marcus, we need to talk, she said. He tried to protest. I'm busy, but she interrupted. No, this isn't about work. It's about us. What are you really feeling? For a long moment, Marcus couldn't bring himself to speak. Then, with a voice barely above a whisper, he admitted, I don't know how to deal with this. Olivia's eyes softened. I'm not asking you to have all the answers, but you can't keep running away. In that instant, he blurted out, I'm scared. The confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. That night, after work, Marcus left the office feeling more confused than ever. Later, while he was sitting in a quiet, upscale bar, trying to gather his thoughts with a glass of whiskey, he spotted Olivia entering with Ethan by her side. The sight of her laughing so easily sent his heart into overdrive. Unable to contain himself, he stormed over. Olivia, can we talk? He demanded, his voice rough with emotion. Startled, she looked at him. Marcus, what are you doing here? He couldn't meet her eyes and continued, I can't stand the thought of you being with someone else. Olivia's eyes flashed with a mix of hurt and determination. I'm not your property, Marcus. I have my own life, she replied firmly. In a moment of raw vulnerability, he reached out and grabbed her arm. Not roughly, just firmly enough. I didn't like it when I saw you with him, he admitted, his voice trembling. Olivia stepped back. So you're jealous? He swallowed hard. Maybe I am. For a moment, silence reigned as they both tried to process the tangled mess of emotions between them. Then, almost impulsively, Marcus pulled her close and kissed her. It was a kiss charged with all the confusion, longing, and fear they both had been trying to hide. When they finally pulled apart, Marcus's eyes were filled with a mix of regret and relief. That shouldn't have happened, he whispered, but Olivia only smiled softly and said, You kissed me, Marcus. You pulled me in, and now you want to act like nothing happened? He closed his eyes briefly, struggling to regain his composure, and muttered, It was just an impulse. Olivia's gaze hardened slightly. Impulses have consequences. Don't you care about what this means? But before he could respond, he found himself retreating, unable to face the truth of his own feelings. Later that night, alone in his apartment, Marcus was tormented by the taste of her kiss and the echo of her touch. In the following days, Marcus tried desperately to return to his old, rigid ways. He avoided Olivia at every turn, skipping meetings if he knew she'd be there, changing his routine, even dodging the elevator when her presence was near. Yet, no matter what he did, he couldn't escape her. Every time he saw her, whether she was laughing with coworkers or simply walking by, he felt that undeniable pull. It was as if the universe was conspiring to remind him of what he'd lost. Then one Wednesday, everything finally came to a head. After a long meeting with the company's top executives, Olivia stayed behind and followed Marcus into his office. Without waiting for an invitation, she closed the door behind her. Marcus, what do you really want from me? She asked, her voice firm and unyielding. He frowned. What are you talking about? She pressed. Do you want me or not? Because you're treating me like a stranger in front of everyone. Marcus's chest tightened. He knew he had to decide, but the words just wouldn't come. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he muttered, Maybe it's best if we end this. Olivia's eyes widened in disbelief. And this? After everything? She snapped, shaking her head. Congratulations, Marcus. You got exactly what you wanted, she said bitterly, gathering her things and leaving without another word. As the door clicked shut behind her, Marcus realized with a sinking heart that he had made a terrible mistake. For a long time afterward, Marcus tried to convince himself that his withdrawal was the rational choice, that distancing himself would make everything better. But the silence was unbearable. Every corner of the office, every quiet moment alone, reminded him of the warmth and light Olivia had brought into his life. He felt lost, unsure of how to live without her. Then, one day, as rumors and whispers filled the hallway, Olivia was at her desk reviewing some documents when she heard a stir among the staff. Curious, she asked Ethan what was happening. With a mischievous smile, he replied, "I think your boss has lost it." Moments later, Marcus appeared, not in his usual sharp suit, but disheveled, barefoot, holding a gigantic bouquet of flowers. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt. The entire office fell silent as he knelt down before Olivia. "Olivia Davis," he began, his voice shaky with vulnerability. "I've been a complete, ridiculous idiot. I ran away because I was terrified of what I was feeling. But I can't run anymore. I don't want to spend another minute without you." With trembling hands, he produced a small box and opened it to reveal a sparkling diamond ring. Olivia's eyes widened in disbelief. The room was silent as Marcus continued, "Will you marry me? Will you put up with me, stubborn as I am?" A murmur ran through the crowd, and Olivia, tears stinging her eyes, laughed in astonishment before replying, "Of course I will, you big dummy." Marcus let out a relieved laugh, slipped the ring onto her finger, and sealed their promise with a kiss right there in front of everyone. In the months that followed, Olivia still couldn't believe it was real. She stood in front of her mirror in a gorgeous wedding dress, processing the fact that in just a few moments, she would become Marcus Cole's wife. If anyone had told her this would happen, she might have laughed it off, but now, looking at her reflection, everything felt exactly as it was meant to be. Later, as she made her way to the venue, Ethan popped in casually, "Ready?" With a deep breath and a smile, she nodded. Meanwhile, Marcus stood at the altar, more nervous than he'd ever been in a board meeting. Yet his heart raced with anticipation as he saw Olivia walking down the aisle. She looked absolutely stunning, radiant with joy, and in that moment, all his fears melted away. Taking her hand, he whispered, "You look amazing," to which she replied with a laugh, "And you're sweating like crazy." Despite the nerves, the ceremony went on beautifully. The vows were heartfelt, drawing both laughter and tears, and when it came time for Marcus to say, "I do," he did so without hesitation, because for the first time in his life, he was sure of what he wanted. Their reception was unforgettable, with Ethan's playful speech having everyone in stitches, and Olivia even dragged Marcus onto the dance floor despite his protests about not knowing how to dance. At the end of the night, watching fireworks light up the sky, Marcus pulled her into a tight embrace. "I never thought I'd have this," he murmured. Olivia smiled against his chest. "Well, get used to it because now you're stuck with me." And for the first time that night, Marcus didn't want to run. He only wanted to stay. What began as a carefully guarded life of discipline and isolation had been completely transformed by Olivia's presence. Their glances lingered a little longer. Their touches grew more frequent, subtle yet charged with meaning, and an unspoken tension wove its way through every interaction. Even though they continued to play the roles of boss and assistant, CEO and employee, something much deeper was building between them. One Friday evening, while they were having dinner at Marcus's apartment, Olivia finally brought up the obvious. "How long are we going to keep this up?" she asked, setting her fork down with a sigh. "You act like we're together, but you're so secretive about it. It's like we're hiding something." Marcus looked at her, confused. "Hiding? I don't know what you mean," Olivia pressed on. "You're always distant, always pretending nothing's changed. It's like you're ashamed of us." Marcus's face fell as he realized she was right. "I've never done this before," he admitted quietly. "I'm scared of getting too close, scared of being vulnerable." Olivia reached across the table and took his hand. Marcus, I'm not like your past. I won't leave when things get hard, but you have to let me in. Her words struck him deeply, and though he wanted to believe her, he wasn't sure if he could fully open up. In the days that followed, Marcus's attempts to keep his distance only made things worse. He became even more withdrawn, and Olivia sensed his inner turmoil. Then, one Wednesday, during a routine meeting, everything finally snapped. After the meeting ended, Olivia followed Marcus into his office and closed the door behind her. Marcus, do you want me or not? Because if you do, then stop treating me like a stranger, she demanded. Marcus's eyes filled with conflict as he struggled to find the right words. Finally, with a tight, pained sigh, he whispered, maybe it's best if we end this. Olivia stared at him, shock and hurt mingling in her eyes. End this? After everything, she said, her voice trembling with both anger and sorrow. You got what you wanted then, so go ahead and walk away. And with that, she grabbed her bag and left without another word. Marcus watched her go, his heart sinking as he realized the full cost of his indecision. That evening, alone in his apartment, Marcus felt utterly lost. He tried to immerse himself in work, but every quiet moment was filled with the memory of Olivia's laughter and the touch that had ignited something he could no longer ignore. Then, by chance, he saw a picture of her on social media, smiling, holding a vibrant cocktail, and with another man by her side. It wasn't just jealousy, it was pure panic. For the first time, Marcus realized that Olivia might actually move on without him, and he wasn't ready to face that reality. In a moment of sheer desperation, he headed to a nearby bar. When he walked in, he saw Olivia laughing and chatting with friends. Unable to contain his emotions, he strode directly over to her. Olivia, we need to talk, he said urgently. Startled, she asked, Marcus, what are you doing here? He couldn't find the right words and blurted out, I can't stand the thought of you with someone else. Olivia's eyes narrowed. So now you're jealous? He admitted, his voice barely steady. Maybe I am, he confessed. The tension grew thick between them until, almost on impulse, Marcus leaned in and kissed her. This time, it wasn't a fleeting mistake. It was a deliberate surrender to the feelings he'd been fighting for so long. Olivia responded instantly, pulling him closer as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Their kiss deepened, and for a few precious minutes, the world around them faded away. When they finally broke apart, Marcus was filled with a mix of regret and longing. Was that a mistake? He asked quietly. Olivia looked at him, her expression softening as she replied, You pulled me in, and now you can't pretend it didn't happen. Marcus's eyes closed as he fought back the truth he'd been avoiding. It was just an impulse, he said, trying to convince himself as much as her. Olivia stepped closer. If it was just an impulse, then why can't you let it be? Her words hit him hard, and he realized he had already lost the battle against his own heart. In the following days, Marcus tried to act as if nothing had changed. He buried himself in work, maintained a strict professional distance, and even avoided any lingering eye contact. But every time he closed his eyes, he still tasted her kiss, felt the warmth of her touch, and saw her smile. The more he tried to run, the more she seemed to appear at the elevator, in the break room, outside the conference hall. It was as if fate wouldn't allow him to forget. Then, one day, Olivia cornered him by his car as he was leaving the office. Marcus, what are you doing? She demanded. He hesitated, then muttered, I'm waiting for you to stop acting like an idiot. She crossed her arms and said, I've been patient long enough. You push me away and then suddenly show up like you're in control. Explain yourself. For a moment, Marcus stood there, his eyes darting away as he wrestled with his emotions. Finally, with a trembling voice, he admitted, I love you, Olivia. The words hung in the air, heavy with vulnerability. Olivia's expression softened, but she replied with nervous laughter, You decide to say that now. Marcus's heart pounded as he continued, I know I've messed up, and I know I hurt you, but I can't live without you. Olivia's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, I've waited so long to hear you say that. Then, with a mix of hope and caution, she added, If you truly love me, you'll prove it. Without another word, She turned and walked away, leaving Marcus staring after her, desperate not to lose her. That very night, Marcus found himself unable to shake the emptiness inside. Determined to fix what he'd broken, he headed back to the office the next morning. As whispers and curious glances followed him down the hall, he made his way to Olivia's desk. In a moment that left everyone speechless, he appeared, this time in a rumpled suit, barefoot, holding a huge bouquet of flowers, and knelt down right in front of her. "Olivia Davis," he began, his voice wavering with sincerity. "I was a complete fool. I ran because I was scared of what I felt, but I don't want to run anymore. I can't imagine my life without you." With trembling hands, he opened a small box to reveal a dazzling diamond ring. "Will you marry me and put up with me, even though I'm stubborn and imperfect?" The office fell silent, and then, with tears in her eyes and a laugh of disbelief, Olivia replied, "Yes, of course I will." Marcus let out a laugh of relief, slipped the ring onto her finger, and then kissed her right there, in front of everyone. In the months that followed, Olivia still marveled at how real it all was. Standing in front of a mirror in a breathtaking wedding dress, she couldn't help but reflect on how fast everything had changed. Soon, she would become Marcus Cole's wife. Looking at her reflection, she realized that every twist and turn had led her to this moment. As she stepped out to meet the day, Ethan popped in with a casual, "Ready?" and she smiled, nodding. Meanwhile, Marcus stood at the altar, his nerves jangling like never before, but the moment he saw Olivia walking down the aisle, all his fears faded. She was radiant, and he knew in his heart that this was exactly what he'd been waiting for. Taking her hand, he whispered, "You look incredible," and she replied with a playful tease, "And you're sweating buckets." The ceremony was filled with heartfelt vows that brought both laughter and tears, and when Marcus finally said, "I do," he meant every word. The reception that followed was a joyous celebration, with Ethan's witty speech and Olivia dragging Marcus onto the dance floor despite his protests about his 2 left feet. As fireworks lit up the night sky, Marcus pulled her close and murmured, "I never imagined I could feel this way." Olivia smiled against his chest. "Get used to it, because now you're stuck with me." And for the first time in his life, Marcus didn't want to run. He just wanted to stay. Their lives, once defined by strict routines and guarded interactions, had been completely transformed. What started as a forbidden touch had grown into a relationship filled with lingering glances, subtle touches, and unspoken understanding. Though they still played the roles of CEO and assistant, something deeper connected them now, a bond that neither could ignore. So, what began as an impossible rule and an impenetrable wall around a lonely heart ended in a love story that defied all expectations. Marcus and Olivia learned that sometimes the risk of letting someone in is worth every heartbeat. Their journey wasn't easy. It was filled with uncertainty, vulnerability, and moments of painful realization. Yet in the end, they found that the only way forward was together, even if that meant breaking every rule they once held sacred.